We're seeing a lot of, the original, the system back in place. I'm sure, there will be some kind of delays when you have this many people traveling and, flights going in and out. But I think, the biggest parts of the disruptions are going to be over.
Welcome to Deep Dive. This week we're examining the lingering chaos in U.S. air travel as the government shutdown is now over, with flight delays and cancellations casting a shadow over the holiday season. Our guest is Samantha Jo-Roth, the Congressional reporter behind a series of in-depth Washington Examiner articles reflecting the human toll on air traffic controllers and the FAA's strained response. Well, Samantha Jo, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, you've spoken to anonymous controllers on the front lines. Walk us through how you first uncovered this story.
Yeah, we have been hearing a lot about these air traffic controllers who are just, overworked. They were calling out in droves over the last couple of weeks. So, I headed to Reddit, which is one of my favorite places to find sources. There's like an air traffic controller channel. And I was able to message, a bunch of them, and several of them, took their time to talk to me on the phone, provided some documentation that they are, in fact, who they say they are. And, we spoke about just how difficult it is to, deal with this job while they're not getting paid. Talking about, several of these air traffic controllers were, working on the front lines, and their counterparts who had called out had left them to deal with, 25 aircraft an hour without, minimal breaks. Mm-hmm. So this is, obviously the shutdown is over now, but this is still a huge issue moving into the future with, these critical people who are dealing with, incoming, outgoing air traffic, and, they're very vulnerable individuals. Yeah,
absolutely. And one Midwest controller called the FAA's 10% flight cuts performative and said safety is worse than a month ago. Can you describe your process for interviewing multiple controllers across regions like Dallas, Fort Worth, and Philadelphia, and did their stories align?
Yeah, a lot of them did align. It was interesting enough because the one controller that I spoke with in the Midwest actually was not at one of the airports that was seeing the cuts. So that was certainly really interesting. But their views were very similar. And, when you look at the bigger picture of the air traffic control, pipeline, there's a lot of issues in terms of the staffing. When you get to the very beginning, these are very coveted positions, but they're also very hard to move out of the process. I think according to FAA data, there's about 20% of folks who are in this program who don't even pass. So, Sean Duffy right now, the Transportation Secretary, is really urging and doing this push to try and add air traffic controllers. And, this is something that we've been looking at for a while now. If you remember back in January with the DCA crash, there was a huge spotlight that was put on these air traffic controllers, questions about whether there were enough people in the tower, if there were enough people, monitoring the situation. And there's been this big push to try and add air traffic controllers. There's been, lots of incentives, bonuses, these kinds of things. But the big thing is right now, you cannot speed through this. It takes years to become a certified air traffic controller. And the fact is, there's a number of them that are, not making it through the entire process. So when you add like a government shutdown on top of this, you're hearing from people who, this is a tough program to begin with, especially in the beginning where they're not making a lot of money. And, it's disincentivizing them to continue doing this kind of work because it's grueling.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And the piece on the recent the piece on the recent quitter in Minnesota was heartbreaking. He said the shutdown was, the tipping point after years of burnout. So how did you track down someone like that? And was he someone that you found on Reddit? And what surprised you most about the wave of retirements, now up to 15 to 20 a day, according to Secretary Duffy?
Yeah, so this is also somebody that I found on Reddit. One of my favorite sources sources of federal government folk, and people like him are not unique. This is a hard program, and especially when you're younger in the program, you're not making as much money. You don't have the savings, and people just get fed up. They're just saying enough is enough. And that's the biggest issue that we're seeing as a result of this government shutdown. There's a lot of folks who are worried that this is going to happen again in the future. They don't want to be the ones stuck working without getting paid. And this is something that we're seeing. Even, the airline industry groups are urging lawmakers to ensure that this doesn't happen again, saying we need to exempt air traffic controllers to ensure, if there happens to be another government shutdown, that, these people are protected. Because as we were seeing over the last couple of weeks, I mean, the FAA had to cut the number of airlines, our number of flights coming in and out of these 40 different 40 different airports. And this is because it was just not safe. And when you talk to those controllers and they're talking about just like the immense amount of their workload, one air traffic controller I spoke with said he was working, and this is like pretty standard across the industry. They would work 2 day side shifts, 2 overnight shifts, and then, like some kind of midnight night shift. And sometimes they're adding a sixth shift. So these people are just going through the ringer with their very minimal work-life balance. They're working a lot of times 12-hour shifts, working 3 hours at a time with a 20-minute break, dealing with 25 aircraft an hour. I mean, that just sounds like a recipe for disaster. And especially after you hear about what happened with the DCA crash. I mean, this stuff is just, it's scary.
Yeah, absolutely. And we know through your reporting that during the shutdown, the disruptions were massive. Over 7,900 delays on a single Sunday, with staffing shortages hitting hubs like Atlanta, Chicago, and Newark hardest. So what patterns did you uncover in how these shortages cascaded into real world chaos?
Well, I think what we really saw were the flights that were getting hit hardest were the ones that were to big hubs. So the regional flights were not as hit because, the FAA was really, and the airlines themselves, they were really trying to, preserve those regional flights. But, the big hubs like Atlanta, Chicago, DC, New York, a lot of those were the flights that were getting canceled. Secretary Duffy has said in recent days that, the disruptions have really gone back to, very minimal. The DOT has taken away a lot of those mandated cuts. So, the big question is your Thanksgiving travel going to be affected? And I think people are going to see pretty minimal cuts or minimal disruptions. As someone who recently just flew over the weekend, I flew to Palm Springs from DC, had several connecting flights, and every single one of them was completely on time. Everything was fine. So I do think that things are returning back to what they were before. But, the harm that there was done to these air traffic controllers, people who are thinking about joining, who maybe saw what just happened and were like, maybe this isn't for me, or people quitting. The fact of the matter is that the FAA has said that they are about 3,000 air traffic controllers short of where they want to be. And that, those are matching back decades. So they need to make up this deficiency. And when you have a government shutdown as long as we just had, that really, makes people not want to join.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And union leader Nick Daniels, he warned of a new risk from financial stress distracting controllers. And pilots, really echoed that. So you covered briefings and statements from the National Air Traffic Controllers Association and the Airline Pilots Association. How did you balance their perspectives with the FAA's defense that reductions were data-driven for safety? Did you have to chase down Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy's team for responses on this?
So it was interesting because a lot of what Nick Daniels said was also what Duffy was saying. And the two of them appeared side by side at a lot of these airports. So really what they were saying was not different than what Duffy was saying. But we did speak specifically to Duffy's team in addition to Nick Daniels' team. And it's interesting because throughout throughout the shutdown, Duffy was traveling to airports. I mean, he went on this airport tour where almost every single day he was at DCA, he was in Chicago, he was, in a small airport in Wisconsin. He was going airport to airport, and a lot of times alongside was with Nick Daniels. The Air Traffic Controllers Association did really try to stay, out of the politics. It was really just saying, we need to open these airports. We need to open the government. We need to, this is a lot of stress on these air traffic controllers. And the DOT was really echoing a lot of the same message. I mean, they were continuing to say that, it's safe to fly, but, these air traffic controllers are under stress, and we are looking at the data and we are cutting, certain airlines. So I think a lot of what they were saying really did, align, and they were trying to work together to, ensure that the public and lawmakers understood just how much stress the air traffic system was dealing with.
Sure. And comparisons to the 2018-2019 shutdown are stark. Delays at LaGuardia and Reagan National were brutal then too. So did your research into past FAA reports help you predict if history is repeating itself now?
I mean, I definitely think that the strain that the airports were showing definitely was a breaking point for lawmakers. They were understanding just how important it was to get the government open. I do think that it took some time to get to those 2018 levels. It did take time to see that stress, but I do think that ultimately, the flights were a huge issue, and I think it's part of the reason why lawmakers were really eager to, end this shutdown. And beyond just the flights themselves, a lot of people that I spoke with, whether it be in air traffic control or, federal contractors or, administration officials, really emphasized that just not having the government open is a national security risk. And you could just see it all play out specifically with the airports.
I see. And I know you said that you personally didn't have an issue this past weekend, which is actually really good news for a lot of people who are probably getting ready to travel for the Thanksgiving holiday. Have you spoken with anyone that gave you maybe a percentage of flights that might possibly still face disruptions during the Thanksgiving weekend? Or, even being 3,000 controllers short, do you think they won't see nearly as many delays as they did during the shutdown?
I think the delays based on staffing should be really at a minimum. I think we saw, according to flight tracking data as of last week or over the weekend, I think there was only 1% of flights that were canceled before the FAA lifted some of those restrictions. And we also saw, the delays were really at a minimum. So I think, we're seeing a lot of, the original, the system back in place. I'm sure, there will be some kind of delays when you have this many people traveling and, flights going in and out. But I think, the biggest parts of the disruptions are going to be, over. The biggest question is this going to continue the next time we have a shutdown? I don't know.
Yeah. And do controllers that you spoke to believe the 30% salary bump and new towers will actually get staffing back to full capacity?
I think the bulk of the folks that I spoke with expressed a lot of skepticism. A lot of them had said that they felt that, Secretary Duffy specifically was inflating what these salaries are. And while a lot of air traffic controllers do make up to six figures, it does take time and experience for those things to happen. So a lot of these air traffic controllers that I spoke with said, usually you're starting off, you're making, $50,000 to $60,000, which sounds like it's not that, that's a lot. But, these people are really working some grueling hours, whether it be during the shutdown or not. there's a period of time, I think it was between February and November, where there's like this extreme weather, like potentially hurricanes, other storms, summer storms, and staff or air traffic controllers are required to be there whenever they're needed, on call, ready. And one of the controllers that I spoke with said that this is like such a stressful time and that's a huge part of the year. So I just think that no matter these salary bumps, the ATC revitalization program that Duffy has talked about, a lot of that is not going to happen very quickly. Congress needs to allocate the funds for this modernization effort. So I think like we're pretty far off in the future. And then, the challenges with the staffing really do take time. So this is not something that they can fix overnight.
Yeah, makes sense. And finally, the union and pilots are calling for an end to the shutdown's unnecessary stress. So from your reporting, what safeguards is the FAA implementing now, like keeping training open or modernizing radar? And are they enough, or does this expose deeper flaws in aviation oversight?
I know that there was a good amount of time where the training for FAA air traffic controllers, I think it was open for the majority of the government shutdown. It was only towards the end where they started to not have those trainings anymore. I think obviously when you talk to the controllers, of course they say the radar could be better, their equipment could be better. But I think the number one thing overall is just staffing. Having more eyes, having more people focused on the number of flights that are going in and out, and not having one controller doing so many things at once. So I think that is, when you talk to these people, they say it is just more manpower, and they stress that over and over and over. So just more people in and out of the pipeline is what is going to be best for the air traffic controllers, according to the ones that I've spoken with.
I see. Well, Samantha, Jo, thank you so much for sharing your process from anonymous calls to data dives. We, of course, look forward to all of your future reporting on the matter and everything on the Hill as well.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for watching Deep Dive. Please visit our website for more of these stories, and feel free to send us your questions or story ideas. We hope to see you back here next week.